On December 3, 2013, near Mindanao, a missionary worker, Samuel Tan, was abducted by a militant faction and held on a remote island. Guards were armed and maintained constant observation, believing escape impossible. Samuel spent weeks noting rotations, understanding terrain, and identifying subtle lapses in vigilance. Fear, adrenaline, and mental stress were omnipresent as he contemplated escape. Using improvised rafts fashioned from discarded wood and vines, he timed a nighttime escape during a moment when the tide was rising, which allowed him to float silently past armed guards posted along the shoreline. Navigating treacherous coral reefs and strong currents, he survived hunger and exposure, reaching a neighboring island where sympathetic villagers assisted in alerting authorities. The successful escape exposed the value of observational skills, resourcefulness, and psychological resilience in hostage situations, demonstrating that even extreme isolation can be overcome with careful planning and courage. On March 18, 1999, in Moscow, Russia, a bank manager, Viktor Petrov, was taken hostage during a violent armed robbery. The captors monitored him constantly, assuming complete control. However, Viktor observed lapses. One guard often turned his back while checking CCTV monitors, and a weakly secured side door was seldom inspected. Adrenaline, tension, and fear dominated as he mentally rehearsed movements, waiting for the optimal moment. One evening, Viktor exploited the guard's inattentiveness, silently opening the side door and exiting into a snow-covered alley. Evading detection required him to traverse narrow streets, hide behind vehicles, and avoid street cameras. He ultimately flagged down police at a nearby checkpoint, leading to the arrest of several captors. The escape revealed that even in high-security urban hostage situations, human oversight and situational awareness can determine survival, highlighting the importance of observation, patience, and courage under duress. On July 7, 2015, in the remote outback of Australia, a mining engineer, Rebecca Lane, was kidnapped by a criminal gang during a supply delivery. Guards assumed control of all movement and built barricades, believing escape impossible. Yet, Rebecca observed minor errors in patrol timing and a neglected access point in the compound fence. Adrenaline, fear, and stress dominated as she silently prepared, using clothing and tools to manipulate the fence. Under the cover of darkness, she exploited these lapses, slipping through the weak section, traversing desert terrain while avoiding detection by search dogs and searchlights. Dehydration, exposure, and fear threatened to derail the escape, but knowledge of terrain and celestial navigation allowed her to reach a ranger station, ensuring rescue. This escape illustrates how acute observation, courage, and environmental awareness allow hostages to exploit overlooked details, achieving survival against seemingly impossible odds. On February 12, 2018, in San Francisco, California, a suspect fleeing a multi-state fraud investigation initiated a pursuit across the Bay Bridge that ended disastrously due to one overlooked detail. Police failed to consider lane closures and construction on the bridge, which funneled traffic into narrow lanes. The suspect, a 34-year-old man driving a sports car, maneuvered at speeds exceeding 110 miles per hour, weaving dangerously between patrol units and civilian vehicles. Adrenaline, panic, and fear dominated as officers attempted maneuvers to contain the suspect, while commuters screamed and swerved to avoid collision. A sudden miscalculation resulted in a patrol car striking a concrete barrier, ricocheting into another vehicle, causing multiple injuries, and creating a traffic jam that blocked rescue units. The suspect abandoned his car mid-bridge and fled on foot into adjacent construction scaffolding, temporarily evading capture. Investigations revealed that insufficient environmental risk assessment, lack of lane closure awareness, and miscommunication between units contributed to the severity of the incident. San Francisco police revised pursuit protocols to include mandatory environmental and traffic hazard evaluations, increased inter-unit communication, and specialized training for high-speed bridge pursuits. This chase exemplifies how a single oversight, ignoring construction lane reductions, can amplify danger exponentially, turning a routine law enforcement action into a multi-layered disaster impacting officers, civilians, and suspects alike. On November 4, 1979, during the Iranian hostage crisis, 52 American diplomats and citizens were held at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, surrounded by armed revolutionaries and political chaos. Among them, several individuals began meticulously observing guard routines, noting shifts, patrol patterns, and moments when surveillance was minimal. Fear, adrenaline, and the tension of constant threat dominated their daily existence, as any misstep could result in immediate execution or beatings. Using stolen materials such as office supplies, rope from curtain rods, and maps of the surrounding embassy compound, a small group of hostages devised an escape plan over months, rehearsing routes and timing while maintaining a facade of compliance. On a moonless night, a subgroup of hostages exploited a poorly monitored section of the compound, silently climbing walls, crawling under windows, and navigating alleys previously mapped from memory. They used darkness, environmental noise, and distraction techniques to avoid detection, moving inch by inch past armed guards. The psychological strain was immense, with heart rate skyrocketing and panic threatening to compromise the operation. Yet focus and coordination allowed them to reach a nearby safe house where sympathetic locals provided assistance. The aftermath of the escape highlighted lapses in guard vigilance, assumptions by captors that hostages could not manipulate the environment, and the critical importance of observation, patience, and ingenuity in survival. This escape remains one of the most famous examples of hostages exploiting subtle oversights, transforming an impossible situation into a temporary reclamation of freedom. On March 15, 1995, in Medellin, Colombia, a corporate executive, Jorge Alvarez, was kidnapped by a paramilitary group and held in a remote jungle compound. The kidnappers were armed and rotated guards frequently, assuming constant control over the prisoner. However, Jorge spent weeks studying guard schedules, noting moments when supervision lapsed or when terrain hindered patrol effectiveness. Fear, adrenaline, and psychological stress dominated his every waking moment as the jungle was filled with predators and traps set by captors. One night, he exploited a moment when two guards argued over shifts, slipping quietly through a narrow gap in the compound fence using makeshift tools carved from bamboo and vine. Navigating the dense jungle, avoiding patrol dogs, and relying on his memory of the river paths, he survived dehydration, insects, and treacherous terrain while maintaining mental focus. After 3 harrowing days, he reached a remote village where locals alerted authorities, resulting in his eventual extraction and the capture of several captures. The escape highlighted how subtle attention to guard patterns, environmental awareness, and improvisation under extreme stress can allow hostages to defy seemingly impossible odds, teaching lessons about vigilance, human resilience, and survival psychology. On June 23, 2002, in the vast Sahara Desert near Niger, a group of humanitarian workers was captured by a militant faction, held in a tented camp surrounded by armed guards and armed checkpoints. One worker, Elena Martel, carefully observed guard rotations and patrol patterns over weeks, noting fatigue, gaps in attention, and weaknesses in enclosure design. Adrenaline, fear, and constant stress dominated her mental state, as the desert's heat compounded the risk of dehydration and exhaustion. Using only limited supplies and makeshift tools fashioned from clothing and tent materials, she secretly prepared a route that exploited blind spots in guard positions. One night, under the cover of a sandstorm, she slipped quietly out of the camp, crawling over dunes and using the storm to mask sound and sight. Her knowledge of celestial navigation, gleaned from prior desert experience, allowed her to maintain direction despite minimal landmarks. She avoided patrols, found water sources, and survived predatory wildlife while evading capture. Eventually, she reached a nomadic settlement where locals provided aid, leading to her safe extraction. The escape demonstrates how careful observation, improvisation, and mental resilience can allow hostages to survive in hostile environments, turning seemingly hopeless circumstances into a testament of human ingenuity. On September 10, 2010, in a densely populated favela in Rio de Janeiro, a wealthy businessman, Carlos Mendez, was kidnapped by an organized crime group and held in a cramped, fortified shack. The captors assumed absolute control, rotating armed guards every hour and restricting movement entirely. However, Carlos observed subtle oversights, gaps in attention during meal deliveries, and inconsistencies in guard alignment. Adrenaline, tension, and panic dominated, as each misstep could result in execution. He exploited these minor lapses, fashioning a rope from bed linens, removing weak boards from the shack, and silently slipping out during a guard shift change. Navigating narrow alleyways, steep stairs, and densely packed rooftops, he avoided patrols and dogs, relying on memory and observational skills. After 2 nights of high-risk traversal, he reached a secure road and signaled for help from local authorities. This escape highlighted that even in urban, heavily populated environments, attention to detail, environmental awareness, and courage under pressure can enable hostages to exploit minor oversights and reclaim freedom.